Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Casada. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but first, I do have just a couple of notes I'd like to review with you. First of all, we are recording today's session. So if you miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to rewatch at a later time, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, and you'll be receiving that shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first and the easiest way is the chat tab. Now, that chat tab is on the right side of your screen, and when you find it, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining in. Now, if you have any specific questions, we do want you to send your questions to the Q&A tab, as we've got time set aside at the end of our program to answer your questions, and we want to answer as many as we can. So be sure to send them into that Q&A section. Now, if you jump over to the handouts, you'll see there are a couple of resources there for you. So feel free to grab those before you leave today. And two $50 Amazon gift card winners will be selected from those who are the most engaged in today's session. So send in your chats, your questions, and be sure to fill out our post-webinar survey. So our topic today is fortifying digital defense, thriving amidst emerging cybersecurity threats. And I'm joined today by Sam Crowther, founder and CEO of Casada, and Sean Brady, head of global partnerships and edge services at AWS. So Sam and Sean, thank you so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Sean, would you like to dive us right into things?
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks, Cody. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I've been with AWS now about 10 years. And Sam, I think you and I have had the chance to work together for several years of that. And it's good to get on screen and be able to talk about the partnership that we've had together. So.
Absolutely. It's been many years fighting problems or solving problems for a lot of customers, eh?
Absolutely. So if we want to, I guess, kick off the first slide that we have there, I think, the goal here I wanted to kind of start with is just to talk about, the overall attacks that we're seeing in the market, Sam, and what's kind of, affecting our customers and affecting AWS infrastructure and what you guys are seeing from a bot defense standpoint. And, we highlighted here a few of these, that you've probably heard in the market there, such as the Las Vegas recent outage that happened earlier this year, where several of the hotel properties and casinos were hacked and down, and terabits of data were stolen. We also highlight the Airbus cyber attack, where vendor data was stolen and hackers were taking customer information. The UK, their electoral commission had a basic security failure that they resulted in massive amounts of customer data. Large companies like Toyota we've seen. I think you guys have a particular one with Okta that you've experienced. Sam, did you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, not for us directly. What's interesting though, we've seen quite a bit, weirdly enough, in the car manufacturing space, and consumer accounts linked to to cars that are internet connected being breached, which is kind of a terrifying proposition that the car that can be remotely located or started or stopped is being accessed by someone on the other side of the world.
Got it. Yeah, and I think we had a massive one this last month that was I think one of the largest recorded ever DDoS events, and I think you saw this across multiple cloud platforms where a vulnerability in the HTTP /2 release had caused multiple cloud platforms to experience just major DDoS events. And I think Google even said this was 7.5 times larger than any attack that they'd ever seen. So just the scale and breadth and the growth of these attacks are something that are that we're challenged with today. And I think on the next slide we highlight that, right? So we're seeing here is not only is it just the growth, but just the size of them, right? And this large volume we see, especially on the volumetric side, where something 15 years ago is now 2,000 times the size of that volume. And then I think, additionally to that, we can add like complexity that you're probably seeing. And we see a lot of this is driven by, I think that the cool thing on that graph, it shows the cost to compute resources are, have dropped dramatically from that time as well. So it's a lot easier to launch an attack from a cost standpoint than it used to be previously.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, mate.
Oh, good. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely. It's fascinating when and we'll probably dive a little deeper into this later, but when tools that were previously inaccessible to all but the most sophisticated actors like nation states or like really large international crime rings, all of a sudden, someone who's just got a knack for it can start to use the tools and can also spin up the infrastructure, required to launch these attacks. And it really changes the dynamic.
Yeah, and I think, and the other thing is we talk about kind of what motivates these attackers, right? And it's really varying, right? I think, some of it is for extortion or financial profit, but then there's also, we see a lot where it's, like you said, government focused attacks or, attacks against cyber warfare or competition, right? And so it's really hard to try to nail down what exactly motivates these attackers and what exactly, types of attacks that are coming and the newest and greatest.
Yeah, and you're right. It's amazing how like literally in just 15 years, it's gone from almost exclusively your, volumetric layer 3, layer 4 attacks, and that has just, completely changed to what we see today.
Yeah, so I think if we kind of get over the next slide, we talk about, at AWS at least, and as you start to think about this, right, like there's been this shift, right, from infrastructure focused attacks, and that's not gone away. We just, with the scale of the cloud, we have a really good ability to kind of absorb that. But those are additional sophistication, but as just kind of just size and volume. But also we need to think about what's going on at the application layer, right? And there's several layers there, right, where you see pretty simplistic attacks, that are kind of scaled across all the applications are kind of consistently hitting, versus now these kind of complex, very target attacks where, those are rapidly changing or maneuvering around kind of traditional security tools.
Yeah, and the application ones get interesting, right? Because to your point, some of them can be quite generic, like your latest 0-day exploit for a router or some sort of load balancer. But when you start to get to attacks that are abusing application logic, it becomes much harder to detect because it inherently can't be as widespread, right? It's only ever going to impact a small subset of organizations that particular actor wants to go after.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think probably next time we'd love to kind of hear as we get into this sophistication, what are you guys kind of seeing over there at Casada that's that you need to think about and our customers need to think about as they look at how to kind of protect those applications?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we have seen change over the last 3 to 5 years has just been the number of folk that have entered the space from the adversarial standpoint and the sophistication that they have access to in terms of tools, in terms of knowledge and resources. It's second to none, right? 5 years ago, it was really, you had to be very, very clever, really know what you were doing if you were going to build a sophisticated bot. Nowadays, you can, sort of go to GitHub, go to YouTube and some, other online forums and get everything you need for basically free, if it isn't free, to launch sophisticated attacks, right? And that sort of influx of people means that the rate of change of the adversaries sort of accelerates, because what starts to happen is they're not just competing against you as a defender, they're competing against other people who are trying to attack you. And so it kind of becomes the worst of both worlds. Like if we take your classic, credential stuffing for ATO, which most organizations face this problem, even if they're using, bot mitigation or bot management tools, the ATOs actually have to have tools that are better and faster than the other people they know are going to try and ATO those same accounts, because it becomes sort of a race to the bottom. And so this has just really forced vendors and organizations who are on the defense to try to keep up, rethink how they do bot mitigation so that they can actually iterate and innovate at the speed they have to keep their customers, safe. Or they sort of end up in situations which we see unfortunately a lot of, where tools and defenses just don't work because they're hamstrung by organizational processes or whatever it is, and just can't move fast enough. What's also super fascinating, and this is more recent, but thanks to, buzzword here, but the tools like ChatGPT, folk are actually able to learn even faster than they otherwise would have. And they're able to get assistance building these tools, right? Now, a lot of, these LLMs won't necessarily directly help build a tool end to end or the whole thing. If you chop it up into enough subtasks, they absolutely will, because they don't realize they're building something that's part of a bigger system. And we've seen organizations that we've surveyed and worked with sort of talk to the fact that they're very, very concerned about how these sorts of tools are going to enable cyber criminals far more than they already are in their very, very sophisticated operations that they come up against.
Yeah, I think I'd point on that too. It's something we're definitely seeing here, and have seen, heard on both sides, right? Like this, what does this Gen AI mean for security, both from an attacker standpoint, but how do we leverage the tools that we have internal here at AWS to help, also, enable the defenders to better identify, those threats.
That's it, right? And that's what it comes down to, because at the moment, for the most part, the people that we're up against, and it is important to remember they're people, bots are just a means to an end. The people that we're up against have no organizational processes that they have to follow. They never have. They have very, very low costs to attack, particularly if you think about a combination of the cost of compute, the cost of proxy networks, the cost of any of these tools they may want to use. They're often incentivized to work together, and whether it's just bragging or actually trying to help out, they very often do. And there's a lot of money to be made for them. And so that sort of puts us on the back foot if we rely too much on, traditional processes, traditional means of securing these, digital channels that our consumers are using, without leveraging, tools that are either highly specialized to deal with these problems, or technologies, like we're seeing, that can have an impact, like Gen AI, right? Where you can all of a sudden have something which can see and understand everything and help the defenders to respond better and faster than they ever have been able to.
All right.
So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're really, really big on, I think it's a very important thing for anyone who's on the defense side, is to have empathy for your adversary. And not in the sense of, oh, I understand why they're doing it, I feel bad for them, but just to understand how motivated they're going to be, right? If someone needs to perform what they're performing against you and you're the only target they can possibly have, and it's to put food on the table, it's going to be a very, very different fight than if it's someone who is just, you are one of 50 organizations they're targeting and they're just doing this for a bit of extra money. And we've put a lot of effort into getting to know these folks, getting embedded in their communities, sort of understanding what makes them click, and leveraging that to help provide our customers better insight and to protect our customers, better. One of the things which always stands out to us is like truly how much these folk work together, how collaborative they tend to be when people are struggling with something that's not super competitive to what they're doing. But something that is more interesting is how these fraud as a service tools have developed. So, 2 or 3 years ago, we started to see in sort of the very edges of the bot world, these software tools that were specifically designed to bypass and beat anti-fraud tools. And they've sort of come more mainstream now, where you can pay someone $2 and they'll generate you thousands and thousands of like these valid human sessions on a lot of these fraud tools, right, to help your attacks become more successful. And so that sort of outsources knowledge, a lot of cases is quite niche, but it means that, again, someone with even less skill can now get into the game without actually having to understand that much. And that's just going to become more and more popular. We have no doubt, because it increases the ROI from the adversary's perspective. The less they have to actually know, the more they can attack far easier than before. And something that has been super fascinating with the Gen AI piece, I'm sure a lot of you would have seen, I think it was earlier this year, where ChatGPT and Bard were actually solving captchas, right? And what's very cool and terrifying is these sorts of methods have actually been used for a while, but this has sort of bumped it into the mainstream and let more of the folk that we're up against actually understand, okay, how can I leverage tools that are out there to trick the fraud systems, all the detections that may be in place for a lot of organizations, and then bundle it up and sell it. Right? It's the hyper specialization of beating specific fraud tools. Maybe it's providing very, very high quality residential proxies. All of this is creating a very, very powerful, almost supply chain in the cybercrime and the fraud world, where you need less and less skill to get into it. And I think that sort of becomes a flywheel effect almost, where more people get in, more people make more money. It incentivizes these providers of very specific bypass tools, good proxy networks, to get even better because maybe there's some competition, and that makes it even harder on the defender's side than it was before that.
Right. So I think then, so we've kind of highlighted, okay, like look, here's what we see kind of evolving and going on in the market. How do we look at this to actually address the problem, right? And I think there's a lot of tools and a lot of vendors out there, and so I think like one of the things AWS we really talk about is this idea of like what does your vendor do versus what does do you need to take action to do. And we have this shared security model we talk about here where AWS takes care of a lot of the heavy lifting for security of the cloud. And so what this means is, for example, like we'll protect infrastructure such as the hardware, software, networking, and the facilities that run actually our services. And so for a great example of this is that recent HTTP/2 DDoS attack. We were able to mitigate that automatically for most of our for our customers and without any challenges to their infrastructure and their applications that were running. But then as we get more and more sophisticated, and the customers build in the cloud, it becomes a lot of times their responsibility. So for example, when you're using a compute instance or an S3 bucket, right, making sure that you provide the proper security policies and proper security posture while you're in the cloud, using the correct firewalls, using the correct best practices when you're there. So I think this is something we think about is this shared responsibility where the vendor will take care of some of this, but at the same time, it's also policies and procedures that you have to put in place as a customer. So I want to jump to the next slide also, and we talk about this in I think when we look at this in AWS, how do we take a layered approach to this? And Sam, I'm sure you guys and I have worked together on like what layers do we need to protect when it's it comes to our customers. And typically we'll start at the network layer, right? This is where we see the brute force attacks, right? These large volume, flood or reflection amplification attacks. And the goal here is really for attackers, as we talked about, to consume so many resources that it either brings down the service or spikes your cost to the point that it actually hurts your business. And then the next layer up, we're looking at the application, right? So these are typically trying to steal customer data, cross-site scripting, SQLi, these common threats that typically are hitting any sort of application. And these are kind of intended to either steal data or compromise the performance of that application that brings it down. And then Sam, I think this is where your expertise is layering in this emerging bot fraud sophistication attack that customers need to think about.
Yeah, exactly. The much more targeted and yet potentially impactful part of that stack.
Right. And then I think the last two here we talk about here is how do you need to monitor and observe, right? Like so. There's a lot that's coming through that you're seeing, and so what are the tools that you have that give you kind of that visibility into the attack vectors? What's the identification metrics? We see a lot of times where customers will have certain pieces of their application or infrastructure that are less concerning versus, login pages or, data that's behind, or, something that's behind customer data, right? Like that becomes much more important. So how do I set and forget maybe kind of certain security policies, but then I need to really like deeply observe and inspect, what's going on in that highly sensitive data. And then what's my security posture that I wrap this around, right? And I think, each vendor tends to do this a little bit differently, right? At AWS, a lot of times we give you the tools and resources, and point you in the direction. But a lot of that is on the customer to kind of build that themselves. And I think, Sam, you guys do a lot more of the probably helping that customer with the heavy lifting and the management of that. So I don't know if you wanted to kind of touch on that.
Yeah, well, look, the way we view it is when it comes to the very, very targeted like fraud and bot operations, it's a very deep area, right? There's a lot to know, there's a lot to sort of have to understand. And if we can, alleviate all of that from our customers, make sure they don't have to actually go as deep and can leverage us to protect them and give them insights, and then have that feed into their overall security posture, it makes life easier for them, and it lets them focus on other problems that are a bit more pertinent to the business.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think, as we look at this here, we wanted to go a little deeper into, what are the products, services, or features that, between our teams that we've been able to help customers with. And one of the things I think, the feature of being in AWS in the cloud is, what do we see differentiates us from a security standpoint? And really, I'd say that the number one value that we bring is just the scale, depth, and breadth of what we offer from a platform standpoint. We have, you can see 32 regions, 102 availability zones. Our edge network extends over 550 feet point of presence these days. That's connecting multiple terabits of data, wavelength, 245 countries, 100 plus direct connect locations. So what that really gives us, and across millions of customers, what that gives us is a ton of visibility on, what are all of our customers seeing as they build with us? What are those attack vectors? What is the large volume that's coming into our environment? What is the sophistication level? And so what we're able to do is really take a lot of that data and feed that back into the tools and resources that we build. And it's both in the cloud and of the cloud, right? So, a lot of this we do is this undifferentiated heavy lifting for our customers. And at the same time, our goal is to, bring more and more observability and feature sets into, our customers so they can customize that based on their unique security needs. I know, Sam, you guys have built with AWS. Any of these things kind of drive your decisions for why you started with us?
Right, absolutely. So one of the benefits and curses, I guess, of the world that we operate in specifically is out of the box, we need scale across every area in the globe, right? We protect some of the largest e-commerce and retail brands in the world, some of the largest hotel organizations in the world, and so that means we need to be able to deal with their collective scale. And to put in perspective, we touch every day about 130 million people. They will touch our systems and interact with us. And that means functionally we ingest about 1 trillion events every week. And it would not be possible to do this, building your own hardware or, trying to leverage platforms that don't let you iterate and scale very quickly. So that was the main reason we chose this out of the gate, and it's helped us improve very, very fast. That's a really important aspect of our product and our service and all of security is a platform that can let you iterate very, very quickly. On top of it, ultimately means you're going to be able to stay in line with or stay ahead of the adversary.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So let's dive a little bit also deeper in some of the products that we own here at AWS that help you really, kind of build that layered security approach. I think, one of the things we recommend to our customers, and we call this here kind of our perimeter protection services. So how do I build kind of that perimeter fence so that I can protect my infrastructure, my applications before it's even under threat, right? And one of the things we do kind of first over here, our recommended approach is is Amazon CloudFront, which is our content delivery network. And really, I see customers, two reasons that they're going to use this. One is our caching layer and our network improves customer performance. So from a latency and availability standpoint, this really helps just in general, improve your application or your infrastructure performance. But what I think sometimes goes unnoticed is, having CloudFront in front of your infrastructure provides a great layer of security, and it really acts as that front door. Yeah, we can skip to the next slide there, Sam. It acts as this front door. And so if you look at this, there's, 550 POP locations globally, and that's all run with a connected backbone, right? And so we connect each one of these POP locations within our infrastructure. And what that gives us is really an availability to block attacks before they're hitting any of either our core AWS availability zones or even on-prem applications, right? So we see a lot of customers that run hybrid environments, and by having CloudFront in front of that, they can push that security posture to the edge. The other thing we do is we have layered actually security within CloudFront. So we have block and allow lists and things that we can do there. And then in addition to that, we've built several native security services in AWS that can help actually protect, deeper inspection there. And the first one I wanted to highlight was AWS WAF. So this provides protection against that layer 7 applications, right? The most common applications threats that we talked about, your SQLi, your cross-site scripting. And the beauty of this is we provide you a lot of custom rules that you can choose to deploy within our AWS WAF, right? So if you're just looking to take care of the OWASP top 10, that's a checkbox button that we make very simple for you. But what we've also done is give, obviously we're builder first, and we've give builders the ability to really customize, based on your application or infrastructure needs, right? And so AWS WAF gives you a ton of flexibility, as well as the scale behind AWS. And then the second thing I wanted to highlight was AWS Shield, which has been, a fantastic service from us. So every single one of our edge locations has a DDoS protection service embedded into it. And what that does is allow us to really mitigate any of those volumetric attacks, right? This was the service that helped us against that most recent threat. And there's two flavors that this comes in. So first is what we call Shield Standard. So just by using AWS infrastructure, if you're using, an Elastic IP, which is, an EC2, you're using our Route 53 DNS service. If you're using an ELB, you're using CloudFront, you're getting standard DDoS protection just by being, on top of AWS. And we also offer an advanced flavor. So for customers that are typically, enterprise, highly regulated industries, financial services tend to get, targets of these volumetric attacks. What that does is kind of isolate your environment into kind of a single tenant view. And what we can do is we also layer in a Shield response team, which is our SOC level service. So you actually have human support that can get on the call with you and make sure if there's an incident. And then we also layer in price protection with that. So for customers that get DDoSed, a lot of times, in the old days, it was your infrastructure kind of goes down and that's a problem. Nowadays, when you have this auto scaling groups that can scale pretty infinitely, it's a cost concern, right? So if I get a DDoS attack that's, scales my resources 100x, I'd pay 100x in cost. And so we actually, provide an insurance policy there for customers that use that service. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight that really ties into well what like Sam and I have done on a partnership standpoint is we built an edge compute platform called Lambda at Edge. And what that does is offer kind of serverless computing for lightweight code deployments. And the beauty of this is this allows us to integrate with third parties. So we can send network calls to, for example, Casada and let them know what's coming through kind of that environment. And then they can make decisions based on that, whether that's, for this sophisticated attacks, is that something that we want to allow back into your infrastructure, or is that something we should block at the edge? So I think Sam probably hand it over to you to kind of talk about how you guys have integrated with us and kind of giving customers a seamless solution. Yeah.
So we as Sean mentioned, use the Lambda Edge piece to integrate with all of our customers that are leveraging CloudFront, because that gives us the ability to inspect and mitigate traffic before it hits their origin, whilst not having to be like a critical inline piece of infrastructure. We also internally actually use the AWS CloudFront and Lambda@Edge for a big chunk of our like big ML processing systems, because it's so fast and lets us transform in real time enormous amounts of data to pump them into like our data lake and our data pipeline. It's actually been super, super effective. So I just want to like shout out that as we actually use this quite a lot.
We appreciate that. It's a good.
Yeah, it's very solid. Let's sort of want to dive into a little bit. Okay, we've got Kasada hooking into CloudFront, leveraging the Lambda@Edge. What sets us apart, or even just how do we think about the bot problem, and in order to solve this as effectively as we can? So the first thing that we realized when we started the business, when we started working with our first few customers, is that the traditional approach to fraud and bot mitigation of innocent until proven guilty, if you will, really doesn't work that effectively when you consider how many IP addresses bots can get their hands on, how many browsers they can get their hands on, because a lot of them only need 1 or 2 interactions to be successful, right? So if you need to see a bot load a page, move its mouse, type in a username and password and click submit, oftentimes it's actually too late, because it'll skip the first few processes and just go straight for that password submit if it's trying to crack credentials. And so we flipped our approach to go, actually, we're going to assume all ingress traffic is bad unless we can validate that it's good before it performs that interaction. And what that does is it puts the onus more on the adversary. Like, it increases their cost, it reduces their window to be effective. And we find that's just so powerful when it comes to undermining why people use bots, and that's because they scale. Now, the next piece comes back to, we're up against people, and it's so important. Is these are very, very clever people. They're usually very financially motivated when they're performing these high volume fraud operations. And so you really need to make life difficult for them and disrupt their own development cycles. And so we've put a lot of effort into making sure that it's really difficult to understand what we're doing, that reverse engineering has a very sort of limited lifespan, that things change enough so that all this time and effort they put into building a solution to try and attack one of our customers sort of goes out the window very, very quickly. And then on top of that, we've layered what we call proof of execution and proof of works, where we just increase the cost of an attack by driving more compute. And that ultimately is why people are leveraging bots, right? Is they do it because they can scale very cost effectively. And so if we can slip in there and actually make it cost more than they're going to make out of launching this attack, it all of a sudden, doesn't become very attractive to them. Now, all of this for us has to be supplemented by keeping the user experience the same. We believe very, very strongly that a consumer should never get a captcha. They should never get anything which disrupts the UX, because A, it hurts businesses' revenue and conversion rates, which is a big no. But it also doesn't need to disrupt them, right? This technology can exist in a completely invisible way, and therefore it should, right? The best security is stuff that you don't even know exists. So everything that we do is under the lens of, is this going to disrupt the user experience? If not, good, let's go ahead with it. If it is, we need to rethink how we're solving the problem. Then as an organization, what we've put a lot of effort into as well is understanding the folk we're up against and making the business and the processes that sit around our threat intelligence team and our security engineering team enable very, very fast iteration loops. So, okay, if we see some new attack trend on one customer or out in the wild that's not yet hitting one of our customers, how can we ensure that the time between first spotting that and having the product updated to mitigate that is as short as humanly possible? And it's amazing how many parts of the business have to work together very, very well, from engineering to product to your threat intel and research teams, to actually make that happen. But when you can pull it off, there's so much value that's created for customers, because they don't have these 3-month or 6-month gaps where the product is waiting to catch up to some of these attackers and they're vulnerable. like we've sort of seen elsewhere and helped customers get out of. So jumping into over to Sean, I guess, how we're sort of hooking in with some of our joint customers' infrastructure.
Yeah, we wouldn't be doing a proper AWS presentation if we didn't add some architecture diagrams here, right? So I think I like to kind of bring this all together as to what does this deployment look like, right? Like when we're layering in these pieces, how do they work together, right? And I think what Kasada and Sam solve is a very unique use case, as well as what AWS does. And so I think, like, when we combine this into what this how this helps customers, it really brings in that nice kind of layered approach as what we talked about. So one of the things that we suggest, as we mentioned, is Amazon CloudFront. Putting that in front of customers' environment is really it does multiple things, right? It protects from from a security standpoint, from volumetric, but it also is improving the performance of a customer's application. And so this can be a hybrid environment, this can be an on-prem environment, this can be a third-party cloud provider, this can be AWS. Like, really, we can deploy this kind of security deployment and standardize it across kind of any environment that customers are running. And so what you see here is you've got CloudFront sitting into kind of that on-prem infrastructure or that cloud infrastructure. You've got your DDoS attacks that are coming in, right, that are being mitigated by what is our shield service. AWS WAF is taking care of kind of that more common layer 7 attacks that that the hackers are bringing. And then with our integration and land at edge, it seamlessly we can add Kasada to that platform and help mitigate against kind of that really sophisticated bot threat that customers are seeing more and more of each day.
Right, so as Sean said at the start, we've been working together for quite a few years. Our whole platform is built on AWS, and what's amazing is how common the problems are across businesses that you think would vary a lot, right? Bots are really good at abusing the same rough business logic flows. So the two main things that we see driving a lot of the work we're doing together are the price and the web scraping. So you're a hotel business, people are trying to get their hands on your rates, or maybe you're a listings provider for real estate or something else. And again, people want access to that data. Right? And all of a sudden, they just drive such a large percentage of overall traffic that makes the website slower. It risks downtime. And at the end of the day, it's intellectual property. And so all these organizations want to keep that data to themselves, so they can actually leverage it, given that it's theirs. We also see quite a lot of issues in the scalping of items. So, you're selling hot shoes, PlayStation 5s or whatnot. Again, it's a perfect combination where bots are able to leverage the price scraping to get their hands on what it's costing on the primary market, figure out what it's going to cost on a secondary resale market, and ultimately sort of get that margin or the arbitrage opportunity between them. So one of the big organizations that we've been working with together had all of the problems you can imagine. So they had the scraping problem, which was causing massive infrastructure and bandwidth issues. It was slowing the website down, which meant there was hits on conversion. And then there was also these large ATO attacks that were coming out of these like foreign fraud groups attempting to get into consumer accounts and ultimately defraud the consumers. From a hard numbers perspective, and this was kind of fascinating, 80% of this organization's traffic was not human, and it was explicitly like bad bots. So when you think about 8 out of 10 visitors to a very, very large organization's website or like apps not being human, it's a pretty terrifying number. And it means functionally like billions and billions of hits every single month that should never be touching that system. They were having more than 60 hours of downtime on their key backend services because of this, right? Just because load keeps increasing, bots can come and go really, really quickly before you have a chance to, pre-scale. So you have to auto-scale. But even if that causes, a minute or two of slowed website or downtime, right, that's unfortunately just revenue loss. And so thanks to the infrastructure that we've got on AWS and thanks to the integration we've got with the Lambda Edge piece, we're able to basically get rid of all of that bot traffic, which not only made their data more secure, it helped their conversion rates because the website got faster. It stopped going down, which meant that there was, again, no revenue loss from downtime. And they were actually able to start understanding, all right, why are people doing this? What are they exploiting in our business? What's profitable for them? And how can we start to dismantle that and make sure that, going forwards, we're not an attractive target for these folk?
Nice. So I think with that, we're going to probably wrap up here. I think and take some Q&A. I think we wanted to highlight just, I think one of the questions always is like, how do I get started or where do I get started with this? So within AWS, we're pretty flexible on the edge and the perimeter protection. And so CloudFront has a great service from a free tier standpoint. So up to 1 terabyte of data free. That's a really, really, decent size for a decent size workload that you can try out and see, how do I deploy CloudFront? How do I want to put it? What applications do I want to put it in front of, and how can I get some of the protections that I layer in? And for those looking for more of kind of a Shield Advanced, that advanced DDoS protection service, we do add that as a 2-month free trial, so you can try that out, see the SOC response, look at how to deploy that across your resources. And so I think those are 2 things that definitely come in and acquire at AWS if you're interested in taking a look at that. And then Sam, I know you guys offer, I think, trials, and you run on our marketplace, so it's easy to purchase all kind of within AWS. If you want to highlight anything that you think will help customers get started.
Look, we're the same. Proof is in the pudding. We're very big on running and showing the value that we can deliver for a month at no cost, right? Because that's sort of a very important first step in a long-lasting partnership. Is, hey, can you show us what you are claiming you can do?
Yeah, I think we have a customer, Sam, where you guys have even had another vendor in there and deployed behind them to show, like, look at how much actually we can show beyond like what you're getting today, right? So
yes, it's one of our favorite integration scenarios.
Yeah, so we've enjoyed that. So great. Well, it was awesome doing this with you, Sam, and we'd love to take some questions and see how we can help these customers. All right. So I think we have one question here. We'll go ahead and kick us off. This is a really good one. How important is building resilience and maintaining business continuity in the face of cybersecurity incidents, and what strategies can help achieve this? So we'll send that out to the chat here. So I definitely think I'll answer that first. There shouldn't be a trade-off between like business continuity and security, and I think hopefully we address that today. Is this should be, we should make this as frictionless as possible from a deployment strategy standpoint, right? This should be solving something that's probably not core to your business, right? And so how do we keep you up and running, and we take care of the heavy lifting, and then you as a business are able to focus on the things that are most valuable. So in my opinion, like, and what we try to do at AWS, and I think Sam, you would agree, like we try not to make that a trade-off, right? And I definitely think like security should be part of every business's strategy, right? Like however you're deploying, like, your cybersecurity strategy should be core to like, how you're looking at protecting your business, but it shouldn't be something that impacts, how you actually develop or build your business from our standpoint.
No, I completely agree. Is security needs to be designed in a way that enables resilience, because like the reality is something is going to go wrong. You don't want to, in a moment of like business weakness, create an opportunity for someone, who's sort of waiting to pounce to sort of get their hands in.
Yeah, and I think the final part of that question was what strategies can help achieve this, and I think from what we see is really trying to push your security as far to the edge as possible, right? So if you can differentiate that security posture from the application, right, and then you can modulize that and move that around. So as you build out your application, your security is positioned at the edge. At least from what we see from an infrastructure and application standpoint, it tends to allow you to mobilize a little better, right? When you embed that into a lot of times like your application development, we see that kind of now I've got to start to think as I develop, like, how do I change my security posture? And I think, what Sam and I highlighted hopefully today is here, we don't want to change like your architecture, right? We want you to continue to develop at pace and the speed, where security should be just, it should be sitting kind of in front of that. So let's see. Any other questions that you see in there, Sam, that you think we should chat on?
Yeah, the one from Haradeep. I think I
Yep.
can publish this, right? Excellent. So is the increase in successful attacks also driven by the unsafe practices of companies? I would sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's just that organizations struggle to move as quickly as the folk that we're up against, right? We as defenders are always hamstrung by legacy issues, whether it's like legacy code, legacy applications, legacy infrastructure, or processes. So a lot of the reasons organizations have these problems is just they actually can't keep up. And this is why, to Sean's comment earlier, it's so important to try to abstract the systems that are protecting you and responsible for pivoting and keeping up with the defenders from the systems that may be slightly more hamstrung. And this is the value of something like an AWS WAF that's like totally decoupled from maybe what was once an on-prem WAF where you had to like go and manually get firmware updates or whatever, update all the rules yourself. That's where this comes into play. It's a monkey patching to a degree, but the reality is it's so valuable in helping you as a defender play the game, because that's what it is, right? Like at the end of the day, this is a game. It's just the outcomes can be quite nasty if it's not played well. So I wouldn't say that most organizations are deliberately doing stupid things. I just think it's sort of a byproduct of how big organizations operate. I don't know if you've got anything else to add, Sean.
No, I think, again, nothing I think is intentional. I do think, though, as you start to kind of experience legacy versus, as you kind of pointed out, legacy to now like new age applications are built, and that transition does expose vulnerabilities, right? Because security on premise, was very different than how security in the cloud works. And I think that's a challenge a lot of times customers have, is making that shift or building here, but I've had this security policy and process here. Like, how do I translate that into, what I'm trying to do with my next gen of applications? And so, I think, we've tried at AWS to try to take as much of that lifting as possible and best practices and build that into the tools that we provide. But it definitely is something that, just to be aware of, that what was once here is not necessarily, what is nowadays, what we're seeing.
More in there now.
All right. So I think Hero has one here too. I'll push this out here. So do you have any recommendations on mitigating social engineering tactics without making employees complacent about security, crying wolf about potential attacks without actually happening? I'll let you, Sam, you probably see that a lot more than I do from a social engineering standpoint. But
yeah, this is a very scary game from a technology perspective. And this is at least like going on what we do internally at Kasada. And I know a lot of other organizations who have very mature security postures take on. You should never have access to anything that you absolutely need. So you shouldn't have access to stuff that's outside your direct job remit. You should always assume everyone's account is compromised. And that can make some people upset. Oh, you don't trust me. Why wouldn't you give me like all this super admin access or whatever it is? But honestly, that's a really important first step, because it means if someone, at the end of the day, people will be tricked, right? It means like maybe it's when someone gets compromised, the damage that can be done is really mitigated. Then it comes down to visibility, right? Like all parts of security, you cannot deal with something you can't see. So how's your endpoint security? How are your access control logs? Are you dumping this all into systems like that exist in AWS, right? We use all of the guard duty systems, and it's unbelievable because now you can actually sort of see what's going on. There's an education piece. I don't know if that will ever get better. Maybe it will. Maybe, sort of tools and techniques will change. But honestly, the best part is to try and make sure you can at least impact damage and like see what's happening before it becomes problematic. And particularly when you look at like these nation states or the really sophisticated folk, we recently were working with, some organizations who were targeted by one of these big nation states. You don't stand a chance. Like they're brilliant. They're brilliant. They will compromise someone's account. So it's okay. How do you just minimize the impact that they have when it happens?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on observability, right? Like like I think that's so key for so many of our customers, right? And I think we see that, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, but being able to ensure that when something does happen, you're able to mitigate that quickly, right? And that's all comes down to what we see is how are you observing across your environment, and what tools and resources can you use that that bring that. Like we have great tools here at AWS like WAF and Shield that you can put in place that do, but again, like there's ways to navigate all this. And so, making sure that you have that observability is a key pillar of, I think, that approach. I think there's another one here. Sam, how long does this take to kind of to deploy a framework like this? So I'll speak from the AWS standpoint, and then you can talk about this. Typically, I'd say like, CloudFront's a service that we see, can be up in 15 minutes and running for customers, right? So that's the beauty of that service. It's really, easy to configure, easy to deploy, and you get the scale of 150 edge locations instantly. And then when you layer on your approach after that, right, like you can layer on Shield pretty easily, and WAF you can deploy. What we typically see, at least on our standpoint, is recommend is about 2 to 4 weeks of actually monitoring and getting the analytics and data through the system from the security standpoint. And what that does is kind of allow you to kind of customize those configurations and see what see what's coming through that environment. So I think probably I would recommend the services can be deployed fairly quickly, but actually tuning them and getting, to them to a point is we see about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on, the size and the scale that you're operating at.
Yeah, from the Casada standpoint, as long as there's sort of good developer and engineering maturity, it's usually just a few hours to get things hooked up. When you're integrating with the Lambda at Edge piece, that's pretty trivial. It's usually just the change processes that take the longest. And then from an actual like when we can be protecting, that's basically out of the gate. Like we've put a lot of effort into having very layered defenses internally, so that even from sort of day one, moment one, there is effectiveness, and it just only gets better over time.
Perfect. In the world of cloud native container applications, is this a runtime protection? Does it reduce alerting noise? I'm going to publish this one out. Sam, you want to take a stab at that, or do you want me to?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Of cloud native container applications. What is it? A runtime protection. Does this reduce alerting noise?
I would say at least the area we're playing is very, very different from like securing your Kubernetes or whatever else it may be. We will be much more focused on the like abuse of the applications running on it versus the containers themselves.
Yeah, I think you're looking more kind of is in the infrastructure side, right? Versus where we're kind of focused, I think, the application side here. So, all right. So I think that's it. If there's any more Q&A, go ahead and dump those in there. But if not, I think we'll probably ready to wrap up. It actually looks like we're almost at time too.
Awesome.
All right, Cody, you want to take us home?
Sure can. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Sean, for joining us today. And if we do happen to receive any more questions before I close out, I'll take a break with my closeout and we'll address it. But I do want to thank the both of you for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. I'd like to remind our audience that we have been recording our session today, and it will be hosted on demand on securityboulevard.com/webinars, and it will be in the on-demand section. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we will be giving away 2 $50 Amazon gift cards. We won't be announcing those winners live, but we will be reaching out to two participants who were especially participatory today. Right. Did we receive one more question?
I think we're good here. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Sam and Sean, once again, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you here at Techstrong Learning.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Of course, I'd like to thank Casada for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who's hearing me, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning Experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, everyone.
Ciao.